Happy fall, friends! And welcome to my fall reading list, autumn TBR, whatever you want to call it. The books that I would like to be reading over the course of this fall-autumn season. Too many books. To set the mood, I have a fall tea from Trader Joe's that is a annual staple at this point, and I hope it's cooled down a little bit because I burned the top of my mouth last night when we were out to eat. So I should just only be having iced drinks today, but 'tis the season, friends. We have the pumpkin mug out. It's the first time I'm using it. I just have to commence. And it's definitely cooled down a lot so I can drink it. Cheers. All right, friends, I think what I'm gonna do is go in order from like lightest to darkest. I don't know, in terms of like the spookiness of the books that I want to read. If you guys follow me or subscribers, you kind of understand what my tastes are. I like witchy books, I like spooky books, I have tried horror and I'm not opposed to horror. I think horror can be such a expansive genre that I'm open to reading more horror. But yeah, I like a range of books, and I think I'm just gonna try and go in order by genre a little bit, and maybe also like the order I want to read them in. So it's September right now and I want to read more autumnal ambience type of books that aren't exactly like spooky or creepy, because I like to reserve October for that vibe. So we're gonna go start there, and I have 10 books on my list. Crazy. 10 books over the course of September, the remaining of September, October, and then the beginning of November. I think I can do that. I'm also ahead on my yearly goal on Goodreads, and just my yearly goal to read 33 books this year, which is crazy because that's a pretty low number, and I set that number intentionally so I could have a more slower paced reading year, because last year and the year before, when I started my channel and trying out booktube content and reading vlogs and things like that, I noticed that I was kind of stressing myself out and pressuring myself to read a certain number or read fast in order to create content or show, you know, my progress on social media. So this year was kind of an ode to taking a step back and just like reminding myself like why I like reading, and this time of the year is my favorite time of the year to be reading, next to Christmas, of course. But yeah, I definitely love Halloween and fall and all those things. As you know, I'm dressed like a pumpkin, almost. I have my pumpkin earrings, which the girl at Taco Bell complimented on. Thank you, person at Taco Bell. Lifted my spirits today. Enough rambling. I also, oh, one last thing I will say before we dive in is that I'm just excited to be talking about books, but taking a step back with my reading this year and just trying to make it more focused on me and why it matters to me. I haven't been doing a lot of bookish content or reading vlogs or like TBR lists, so I'm just excited to be doing this. All right, enough rambling. Let's get into the book, shall we? Okay, we're gonna start with the book that I'm currently reading and hope to finish very, very soon, as in like this week, and it's The Royal Assassin by Robin Hobb, and this is book 2 of the Farseer trilogy. The first book was Assassin's Apprentice, and I read that book. I think that was the first book I read this year, actually, and I absolutely loved it. Just am so excited for this series and to discover Robin Hobb. That was my first Robin Hobb book, and I am potentially a stan. I'm really excited to finish this book and the next book in the series, and I know that this whole trilogy, the Farseer trilogy, is part of a bigger Elderlings series, so it's just so fun to like dive into this world. And Robin Hobb has a wonderful way of world building and character building, which is like so important to me when it comes to fantasy books. Again, if you saw my reading vlog where I read Fourth Wing, the world building, the characters, it was all terrible. So I have a pretty high standard when it comes to those two things in my fantasy book, and Robin Hobb is delivering. This book follows Fitz, who is a bastard of the king, and in the first book he realizes that he's a bastard to the king, and then he comes into court and essentially becomes the king's assassin, and he's trained to kill people under the king. And we kind of watch him grow up from being a child into a teenagerhood, In the second book, he's, I think, 14 or around that age, so we see him grow like in his teenage years. There's also kind of a love story setting in this book, and I've gotten to a point where they're about to go on a quest. So I think book one was more quest heavy in terms of like going around this world and doing things. This one, so far, the majority of the book has been kind of set like just within the kingdom itself and Fitz's, you know, things that's going on within the court, and we learn more about the characters and kind of see those relationships develop a bit more. So I'm just really enjoying this. I'm so excited to see how it ends and read the next one, which I probably won't start until next year because I have 9 more books that I want to read. So next. Okay, the next 2 books are kind of witchy and authors that I've read before and have made reading vlogs on and you guys have probably seen, but we have The Book of Life by Deborah Harkness, and this is book 3 of this series, the All Souls trilogy, where we have Diana, is that her name? It's been a long time since I've read the last book in this series, Shadow of Night, which I read last year. But it's about a witch and a vampire and the world that they are in, and I don't even know like what is the premise of this third book. So like book 1, we get introduced to the characters and there's this manuscript that is kind of the main plot that they're looking for, and we, you know, go on those adventures to find that. Book 2 was really fun because it went back in time to like the 1500s or something, and I loved that obviously for the historical fiction aspect. This book, I'm not really sure what's going on. They're coming back from Elizabethan London, which is what book 2 was mainly about, and they come back to the present after that crazy adventure, which I definitely remember, and of course they face new drama, new enemies, and we kind of see the end of this. I know this is the end of the series, but there's also a third book, like a standalone book, but it's kind of like the next, like what happens after this series, so I don't really know if that's like considered the true end or if this is like an end to at least maybe this like certain saga with this Ashmole 782 manuscript. I'm really excited to read this for the vibes. I probably want to read this next. A next witchy book by Alice Hoffman. Again, we've read her several times on this channel, and this is Magic Lessons, which is part of the whole practical magic world and series. There's several books within this, and you can read them in a different order, depending on what you want to read it in terms of like publication order or like the order, I guess the story was intended by the author, but I am reading them in publishing order because chronological order just makes the most sense to me. This one is saying it's book 1 of the Practical Magic series, although it was published 3rd of the 3. So we're going way back to the beginning of this family as it chronicles the Owens bloodline, which is a family of witches dating back to the 1600s. In the first 2 books, we see, the first book was the modern day Owens family. Book 2 was the Owens like a generation before them in like the 60s, 70s time period. This book goes back to the 1600s, and we get to really see the origins of the Owens family and all of that. So that's really exciting. I want to read this one too next. Our next book that kind of falls in this theme of like witchiness is The London Seance Society by Sarah Penner. Sarah Penner wrote another book before this that I read called The Lost Apothecary. I also did a reading vlog on this, I think 2 years ago, and this book disappointed me greatly. So I'm giving Sarah Penner another chance and really hoping that this book delivers, although my expectations are lowered considering my experience reading The Lost Apothecary. But this is continuing the vibes of England and the 19th century, and this takes a stab at occultism and a seance society with murder and mystery, and that's essentially all you need to know. But I've had this book for quite a few months and I've been saving to read it this fall, so this might be a very good like September to October, early October read alongside with my other witchy reads. Again, I've so much to read. Okay, we've departed from our kind of like witchy fall ambiance book genres and moving more into like mystery and horror if you will. Where do I start? Let's start with Ruth Ware, 0 Days, which is her latest release, which came out a few months ago. I'm just a Ruth Ware stan. I've said it a million times, I won't say it again. So every time a new Ruth Ware book comes out now, I just go out and get it and I read it despite any expectations that I have. Her release from last year, The It Girl, I liked it. It wasn't my favorite. One by One is definitely my favorite so far. I read that a couple years ago and also made a reading vlog for that one. That book was, ooh, I still think about that book. So I guess I don't have expectations for Ruth Ware other than that I'm just going to enjoy the experience reading it, and I kind of have a bias towards how I review her books. But this one's actually kind of a weird, not weird. I think what I like about Ruth Ware is that you kind of get something different from her, like each time she writes a book. Like, we all know she's like more mystery, and then sometimes she'll throw in a thriller, so it's kind of like, I don't know what to expect. And the same goes with kind of like her plots and like her characters. It's always different. So this is actually about a couple who work in like security, like IT security, and they're called security penetration specialists. They are hired by companies to look for weaknesses in those companies' systems and obviously secure their intel. What happens is one of the spouses comes home and finds the other spouse dead. That spouse starts to be looked at as the suspect. So mystery, mystery, classic Ruth Ware. Very excited for this, probably an October read for me. All right, the next book is actually a book I'm borrowing from my friend Amanda, Small Angels by Lauren Owen, which is a gothic novel that came out I think last year, and I wanted to read it last year, but just it never came up into like my like immediate like radar. But this actually could also be good for like September into October, but you know, we'll pick it when it's calling us. In a hypnotic tale of sisterhood, first love, and hauntings, a wedding in a small English village stirs up unsettling magic and forces a troubled family's secret out into the open. We have family, we have sisterhood, we have the woods, we have secrets and magic. All these lovely, lovely things that I adore. So this would be a really great fall read as well. Duh. All right, we're moving into more like horror genre, which would be perfect for the end of October into early November. And the first book I have is Final Girls by Riley Sager. I guess this is like a thriller, horror, kind of maybe more thriller, I'm not sure. Riley Sager generally writes thriller and mystery, but I've embarked on a journey to read all of his books now that he just released The Only One Left, which, you guys, I know this is a TBR video, but I read this one already, but if I hadn't, I would definitely be reading it this season. I started it when I went on to vacation in Vermont and finished it when I got back. This is like, I think, my favorite book so far this year. 5 out of 5 stars. It had the mystery and the twists and the turns that just worked so well, kept me guessing until the end, had me shocked and my mouth open. And it was Riley Sager's last book before he takes a major break from writing, because he's been churning out a book a year for like the past 10 years. So he really went out with a bang, and I cannot recommend this book enough. It would certainly be #1 on this TBR list, but I'm throwing it in as a recommendation because it was so good. So with that said, I still have plenty of Sager books to read. So Final Girls is one of the ones that I want to read, and I'm borrowing this from Amanda. This is an advanced reader copy, so I'm hoping it doesn't have any major changes, and if it does, okay, oh well, we're in for the ride. This is part psychological thriller, part homage to slasher fix and film noir. So I know this is a pretty like well-known and like highly rated book within the booktube community, I feel like, because it came out in 2017. So it is definitely like more of a horror leaning book, and it has lots of references to slasher movies, which would be perfect for Halloween in October. But it is about a college student, Quincy Carpenter, who went on vacation with 5 friends and came back alone. She was the only survivor, as all of her other friends were murdered, and she became part of this club called the Final Girls, which is a group of similar survivors who are part of mass massacres and are like the only ones that are still alive. So the plot thickens and gets kicked off when another final girl is found dead. Quincy, who's our main character, who's also a final girl, is kind of roped into this mystery and is like, am I gonna be next? So, chilling. My next book is The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones. I've had this book for a few years and have been wanting to read it, but just haven't picked it up, so I'm putting it on my TBR. I've read another book, My Heart is a Chainsaw by Stephen Graham Jones. I read that last year or 2 years ago. I don't remember. It was kind of my first like horror book and first Stephen Graham Jones book, and I really enjoyed it. It was definitely like different for me, but I definitely enjoyed it, and I want to read the second one of that series, but not gonna be reading it this year. But I have a copy of this. I'm also trying to like not buy a lot of books and try and read what is existing on my shelf, so that's why we're putting this one on the list. But this one is about 4 indigenous men who, after a disturbing event from their youth, puts them in a desperate struggle for their lives. A tale of revenge, cultural identity, and the cost of breaking from tradition. I'm just excited to read another Stephen Graham Jones book, and kind of, I know this was also highly reviewed as well, so I'm just excited to see what my opinion is. 2 more books, friends. We're almost there. We're almost to the end of this. Vampires of El Norte by Isabel Canas. I just love this cover. As the daughter of a rancher in 1840s Mexico, Nena knows a thing or two about monsters. Her home has been long threatened by tensions with Anglo settlers from the north. But something more sinister lurks near the ranch at night, something that drains men of their blood and leaves them for dead. Da-da-da-da-da. I just love the historical context, like the background going on in this story with the United States invading Mexico in 1846 and all the drama of colonialism and land and fighting over that, and add in the supernatural element with vampires and like death and things going bump in the night. I love it. I'm excited. I want to definitely read this close to Halloween. And I also know that this author wrote The Hacienda, which has been recommended to me, and I think it's on my TBR, and I just never got around to reading it, so we're reading this book first, and that's okay. My last book is Silver Nitrate by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This was like kind of the only new book that I purchased. Actually, no. These 2 were the most recent new books that I have purchased and kind of went out of my way to invest in, to read for the fall time. Seeing this talked about, some booktubers that I watch have read this, and just hearing their descriptions about it got me really interested in it. And this is another horror book. I've never read anything else by this author, but I know that they wrote Mexican Gothic, which is another book that has been recommended to me over and over and is on my TBR, and I have not read it yet. So again, I'm reading another book that comes out after these bestsellers from these 2 authors because I go against the crowd. So this is fun because it's a meld of Mexican horror movies and Nazi occultism, a dark thriller about the curse that haunts a legendary lost film and awakens one woman's hidden powers. So we have our main character who's a sound editor, which sounds so interesting. I guess this takes place in the 90s in Mexico City, so we also have a little bit of, you know, historical aspect going on, being 30 years ago. So I guess there's this curse on this lost film, and then the main character and this other character come into contact with this legendary cult horror director who wants to finish this film because the film was never finished because it was cursed and caused issues, probably death. Now this director wants our main character and this other person to help them shoot this film, lift the curse, but of course things are gonna go wrong, and that is what is happening in this story. So we have horror, we have mystery, we have supernaturalism, we have occultism, we have Mexican horror movies, lots of exciting things, and this is kind of out of the norm that I would usually read. Like at first I wasn't really interested, like when I read the summary and that it's like a sound editor and things like that, but after hearing some other people talk about it and say that they enjoyed it and really loved it, I'm excited to read it. Let's do it. Let's do it. Here you have it, friends. Allow me to pose for a thumbnail. These are the 10 books I want to read. I'm gonna put it down now because things are falling. Oh my god. All right, friends, those are my 10 books. I hope this video brought you some reading inspiration or motivation or gave you a recommendation or two to pick up and read this fall. I would, of course, want to hear what you are reading, whether you're reading it now, you want to read it this fall, or just any general book that you want to recommend to me. Let's talk about books because it's been a while and I miss talking about books with you guys. So happy September, happy October, happy fall, happy autumn, and happy reading, friends. I will see you in the next one. Bye!